All right, so right at the beginning, I'll just tell you this. On my podcast, in the description below, I post timestamps. So if you don't want to hear me ramble on for a few minutes with jokes, just go to the timestamps and and you could skip forward, get straight to the content, make it a little bit easier, more accessible to you. Maybe you find my humor not very funny. Um, Anyways, just kind of started off a little lightly. I was watching The Chosen the other night. I finally finished the first season. By the way, please watch The Chosen. It's just such a uh, beautiful masterpiece of a show. It really, I personally think that it shows who Jesus, like what it was like to be around Jesus in person. It captures the humanity of Jesus, which um, something that's very essential in Christian doctrine is that Jesus was fully man and fully human. Wait, lol, my bad. Excuse me. He was fully man, fully God at the same time. All right, that's what I meant to say. But anyways, I think very often we kind of forget about the human part, the human side of Jesus. It can be easy to because, I mean, man, he's God. But I think the show really captures his humanity really well. So I would really encourage you to watch it. I mean, I someone cuts onions by the end of every episode. I don't know who keeps doing it, but man, at the end of the episode, holy moly, it's so powerful. So I really encourage you to go watch it, um, and then donate if you like it as well. But because it is crowdfunded. But anyways, I was watching it, and the cool thing about the show, they take artistic liberty. They show Jesus joking and laughing and things like that. Really get into the humanity aspect of him. And I was just thinking about like man, imagine if you're one of the disciples and you're on one of your walks with Jesus to wherever you're going in the Near East in Israel, and you're bored. You got a lot of time on your hands. You're just walking, and just like imagine if you're John, right, and you're walking. You're like, hey Andrew, what color am I thinking of? Andrew's like, how on earth could I know that? Hey, Thomas, I bet you can't guess what color I'm thinking of. It's like you have no evidence of what color you're thinking of. And then Jesus, he's like way up ahead, and then he just shouts, "Orange." What? And then you catch up to him. He's like, "Yeah. How did you know that?" And then Jesus just stares intently. He's like, "The same way I know that you double dipped the leavened bread into the hummus last night. It's the same way. The same way I know that your tunic is on backwards." Just kidding, I could see the tag. I don't know where I was going with that. I just thought it'd be really funny, right? Like thinking about the types of games you'd play. Maybe not games, but it's very serious work that they're doing. Okay, don't want to undermine that. But anyways, go watch The Chosen. It's a fantastic show. Uh, it's kind of where my mind wanders sometimes, thinking about hypotheticals. But anyways, I hope lockdown, quarantine, what have you, is going well for you. Hopefully, you're finding some interesting ways to spend it. I know I have, certainly. I hope your hair has been looking okay. I've understood that the hair is quite the concern amongst people in these trying times. Um, I was actually very fortunate because maybe about a week or so before the lockdown happened, I cut my hair very, very short. So I'm still okay. Oh, excuse me. But yeah, soon it might turn into a mess. So I'm thinking there's basically two options at this point. One, long hair. I could go back to the long hair I had in high school. It's awesome. Totally be down for that. Or two, mullet. The way I see it, the way how things are turning out, those are the only two options. I mean, really the only ones. I've never done the mullet before. I'd like to give it a try. Maybe a subtle mullet, um, not like, yeah, a subtle mullet. It's not like a loud '69 Camaro. It's like really in your face, loud, very loud American car, like like how loud a mullet is. It's more like, I don't know, a Chevy Malibu, but with a Corvette engine in it. All right. I don't know. I just don't know how I think like this. It's kind of strange. Um, I just kind of start with an idea. I start with something that's funny, and then I go to the line where it's funny, and I cross. Just keep going. Oh, wretched man that I am. Anyways, okay. So here we are back into another episode of the podcast. I wanted to ex- extend the ideas put forth in the last podcast, talking about God and government. There was a lot that I didn't get to. I realized the last half of the podcast was essentially me ranting. I was getting a little emotional, a little worked up, and I was, in some sense, I was kind of disregarding what I was saying in the meat of the podcast. But so, anyways, I want to rein it back in, elaborate on what I mean, and then kind of apply it a little bit more clearer and neater to where we find ourselves today. So yeah, let's get into it. So at the last podcast, you probably heard me ranting a lot about the whole issue between economic side of things and then the lockdown. So there's two kind of camps, two sort of outlooks on this on our response to the coronavirus. And some people will say, nope, we need to be fully locked down, we need to be fully quarantined. Even the measures we're taking aren't enough, or a variant of that. And then other people are saying, look, the data is starting to get clearer. It doesn't turn out to be as bad as we might have thought. And frankly, this quarantine and lockdown, it's going to kill our economy. And what that means is that people are no longer able to pay to put food on the table, provide for themselves. There's kind of two sides of the argument the way I see it. And some people might fall in between. I guess kind of with everything nowadays, there can be a spectrum. But anyways, I think it was kind of clear where I came down in the last podcast. But I wanted to kind of give some more heart, because I think I came off a little bit brutish. But to give some heart, something I was thinking about as I watched the public discourse on this very topic. Do we stay locked down for a long time, or do we open up the economy with precautions, right? No one who's saying open up the economy is just saying, oh, just society back to normal. No, people are saying, hey, let's do it with precautions. Anyways, proponents of both sides, as I see in the public discourse, they get a little ugly in their argumentation with one another, as many arguments in the public square do. It gets ugly, and I was kind of thinking about this as I was refreshing myself on the moral argument for the existence of God, and something that occurred to me was that I think one of the biggest problems that we have right now in America, and I think this virus is highlighting that, is both sides accuse the other of not sharing the same moral principles. So, what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. So take, for example, something like healthcare. People on the left will say the government should give everyone healthcare. The government is the means to provide healthcare for everyone. People on the right, they will say, no, the government shouldn't do that. be the free market that allows for people to receive health care and the specific health care that they want. I don't want to get into the weeds on where I stand on that, but notice the underlying value that both camps have, and that value is every person should have health care. Every person should be allowed to have access to a way that can not just sustain their life, but if their life is compromised, if their health is compromised, to preserve sort of the dignity of being a human being, they should be allowed a way to mitigate that compromise, or in better cases, solve the compromise. Both sides hold that same value, right? They just disagree on where the rubber meets the road, and that's fine. The issue is that you'll see people, I noticed this on the left, mainly because of my own bias, but I see people on the left saying, when someone on the right will say, no, the government shouldn't be the one to provide health care for everyone, people on the left will say, oh, well, you just want all people to die then, don't you? I grant it's a little bit of an extreme, perhaps a slight little straw man of that, but I mean, I hear it, and I hear things that are not too far from it. And then also, people on the right, as best as I can see it, keeping in mind that I do have a little bit of a bias, I think it's pretty clear that I'm more on the conservative side, but people on the right will say, oh, well, you people on the left are just socialists who want to usher in a tyrannical government that oppresses on everyone and expands the scope of government. Now, I do think that there are a fair number of people on the left who, that's not their intention. Their intention is, no, we want to give people health care, and the way we see it is government is the best means to do that. But in the discourse, we've forgotten that. We've thrown out the fact that people value the same thing. And now, how does this apply to the current affairs? And that is, people who are proponents of, nope, we need to be quarantined for as long as this goes. This supersedes the economy, and that's it. Hard line. Those people, and I've seen this in the public discourse, will accuse the people who say, let's open the economy with precautions. They will accuse the people with, oh, you just want old people to die, or you're okay with a bunch of old people dying. You're okay with people dying, and then people on the right. I shouldn't say right, although it is more conservative people who are saying this. But people who do say, oh, we need to open up the economy with precautions. Sometimes, like I said, I'm biased. I'm more on the open up the economy with precautions side. That's where I lay on this. Don't want to get into why, but sometimes people on this side will say, or rather, they may underestimate how hard it is to open up the economy. That's not to say it can't be done, but they may underestimate how hard it is, and they may throw out or because they underestimate it, they think people who are saying we need to lock down completely are I'll just say, for lack of a better term, they think they're stupid. But the underlying moral value in all of this is that we want human beings, because of their dignity, we want them to be able to, of course, survive, and then in a much, if permitted, thrive, right? Survive, and if permitted, thrive. And, people who say all lock down, we need to lock it down to save lives, right? And then people on the open up the economy with precaution side, they'll say, we need to open it up because people are not going to be able to put food on their tables. And then especially with the news that I've been seeing is the third world countries, they may actually be even more severely impacted by the economic side of things. But I digress. Um, but I think we would do well to recognize that each side is saying, let's, or each side is saying we want to do what is best to help people survive and, if permitted, thrive. And I think we would do better to remember that, and we would unify sides better to do that. And just as a mental exercise, think about just pretty much any issue that you might come up with in the public discourse. Think of something like, let's say, coming up with an example, a hot topic like gun control, gun laws, right? Think about the two sides of the argument. Think about something like welfare, even something like foreign policy. Take a look at both sides of the argument. See if you could find the underlying moral principle, and you'll actually start to find out that they're probably the same. Right now, I could go into, oh, well, that's interesting how we have the same moral value, and so many of these people, even though they don't believe in God, they hold the same moral value as people who do believe in God, and talk about the moral argument of God. But all that is to say is I think we're actually much more unified than it seems, right? I don't know if that makes sense. But that's what I'm getting at. That's what I kind of want to put a cap on everything I was talking about in the last podcast, just so it's not so much of a rant. Hopefully I can offer some peace, maybe quiet down the fire a little bit. But yeah, so I want to elaborate a little bit, going back to the church's place in society, kind of taking the political philosophy derived from Scripture in the last podcast, and what does that look like today, right? So if you think about it, wherever we're at, no matter how frustrated you might get with what the government's doing, more so state and local government, frankly, chill, right? I mean, if you think about it, just chill, you know. It sucks. You may disagree with a lot of it, but you know what? At the end of the day, we can take the warnings in Romans 13 seriously. It's like you're going to cause a lot of unneeded controversy, unneeded strife, and issues for yourself. But the issue is that's not a blanket term. So you don't just chill and let the government walk all over you. So if the church is specifically targeted, that's when things get a little bit more dicey. But again, still chill. Keep doing what you're doing, because keep going to church, and if the government targets you, then you know what? I think that's the sacrifice that we're called to make. As I talked about in my previous podcast, is don't sacrifice your soul. Submit to the government, but don't sacrifice your soul. And I think that's something to keep in mind. So yeah, if the church is not specifically targeted, just kind of weather it. I think Christians throughout the centuries and in modern day, certainly in modern day, Christians are living in countries where the laws are just, from an American standpoint, just don't seem to make sense. They seem to be very anti-liberty and things of that nature. And in their cases, it's like, you know what? That's how God designed it, for a reason that we don't know, because we're not God, right? but at the same time, they don't sacrifice their soul. And it's quite brave and beautiful, some of the ways that they don't sacrifice their soul. We could use them as an example. But something that I kind of want to think about here is, the scripture was written back in the first century, especially on government, the New Testament aspect of what to do with government. It was written in the first century. And at the time, it was basically just a monarchy, or maybe specifically for the Christians, they were in a Roman monarchy with powers delegated, as best I can understand it. But what happens when we find ourselves in a society where, hey, actually we the people do have a say in what our government looks like, who is running the place? What happens when we have a say in that? Now, that's not to say that, because we have a fundamentally different government, what was said in Scripture doesn't hold true. That is not at all what I'm saying, because I think the Scriptures do apply pretty well to even today. Authority is authority, but I think it's something worth thinking about is, how should we think about government if we can participate in it, if we can vote? And that's something I would like you to think about, especially with now. Take notice with what governors and what mayors are doing what in this crisis, and vote how your moral conscience leads you. Now, I personally think that individual liberty is a great thing, and I think, in fact, I know that a lot of the early political philosophers, founding fathers, they did get these ideas of liberty. They got them, their biblical principles. So I think, if we do have a say in our government, then I think we should vote to try to sustain the liberties that we do have right now, and we should try to aim for that. And that means voting for people who are going to enact that legislation, strike down legislation that is against civil liberties. I think that's exactly what that means, right? We can't specifically vote on policies unless it's local government, of course, but in many cases we're voting for people, and we're hoping that they would vote a certain way. I think we should uphold the civil liberties, but and then try to vote for things that are more in line with biblical principles. Obviously, I think that's a given. Now, here comes the interesting conundrum of all of this is, I've heard of Christians who think that the most moral society is, or the most moral form of government is socialism. I don't. Certainly I don't. But I've heard Christians think of it that way. But then I also hear Christians, more so on my side, who do believe in a limited government, the power of the people, right? Believing in those principles. So there seems to be a spectrum in how we can apply biblical principles to the way we interact with government. But I still think that no matter what, we should try to use the values of the Bible and vote accordingly. I think it's a wonderful thing that we've been entrusted to, but frankly, now I'll get into a little bit of some personal opinion here. As I said in the last podcast, talking about how government can be a corrupt institution, number one, because there is some evidence and I would argue strong evidence that Satan does have some sort of a dominion over the powers that be. I'm not sure if it's a blanket dominion. I don't think it is, but he has some sort of dominion over it. And number two, because of the corrupting agent that power offers. And we find a lot of power in the government. So I think that's a biblical principle that I have, or that I see, and I hope that I argued for that clearly. And if you disagree with me, please tell me how and why you disagree with me. But I apply that to the way I vote, if you will, and I think, yeah, we should have a little bit more of a limited government, restrain the government. But the issue is you might think to yourself, like, well, that might tie us to one political party, right? People on the left tend to favor a view of government that expands its powers, grows the government, and then people on the right tend to be people who limit the power of the government. Although you can be on the right side of the political spectrum and have a very like overwhelmingly intrusive government, but that's kind of a digression. Just the political discourse we find ourselves in is that's usually how it works out. Left side is bigger government, right side is a little bit on the smaller side of government. But I don't think that we should marry ourselves to the Republican Party, though. I think there's actually a lot of issues with that. Because oftentimes I would argue the Republican Party, they definitely, they definitely have their missteps, their misdeeds. I find myself on the more conservative side, but at the same time, I'm not a diehard support the Republican Party for everything. I notice I think there's a lot of people in the evangelical community who are, very, very pro-Trump, very pro-conservatism. The issue is that what happens when the Republican Party or Trump does something that is, that was bad, or in the case of Trump, where he says things that are like, all right, dude, that was just clearly wrong. That reflects poorly on you, and it reflects poorly on what you believe in, right? Because you think of how outsiders view you. It's like, oh, that guy, he's a diehard Trump supporter, but he also is a Christian. And Trump just did that, and I don't know. That's an issue. It's quite an issue, and I think actually what gives more credibility to being Christians in the world is if we can call it how we see it. All right, government, they just did something good. Here's why we think they did something good. Hey, government, they just did something bad. Here's why we think it's bad. I think that's very important. I think it lends a lot of credibility. But here's my issue. Like I said, I've heard Christians who make the case that socialism is a much more biblical form. I think they're far and few in between. I think they're more so in Europe than they are here in America. However, there are Christians who vote Democrat. That's fine. Well, actually, I don't want to say that's fine, and you'll see why in a minute. But there are Christians who believe that it is well within a biblical worldview to vote Democrat. And I don't want to sit here and tell you how you should vote. That's not my goal here. I just want you to think about how you vote. And I want to challenge you on something. How should I say this? there's a huge issue that I think should take a lot of precedent in how we determine who we vote for. And that is the right to life, the sanctity of life, specifically the issue of abortion. Abortion is evil, morally repugnant, and I would say the worst humanitarian crisis of our time. And I say that confidently. I don't apologize for any of that. So, how should I say? The issue becomes what happens when one of the parties has completely sold out to the abortion industry, which the Democratic Party has. Frankly, it sucks, right? I wish both parties could agree on the sanctity of life. And then it's like, okay, you know what? Just go vote for whoever you want. That's fine. No, I'm not going to sit here and tell you who to vote for, except for think about this issue. Quite honestly, as a Christian, I don't know how people vote for, how other Christians vote for a party that has completely sold out to the killing of innocent babies on a mass scale. I don't know how people can do that. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think that we as Christians, we find ourselves in a country where we've been entrusted with something like voting privileges. And I think as Christians, we should try to apply biblical principles. We should try to make this world a more just and better society. And I simply do not see how you do that by voting in people who are who are deliberately carrying on an industry that kills massive amounts of innocent lives. Now, here's the other side of that coin, because I know that there's people who are listening to this who are probably very conservative, who vote hardline Republican, and are Christians and are strong in their convictions with Christianity, who are probably saying, yeah, that's what you should say. Here's my issue. I don't let the Republican Party off the hook either. And here's why. The Republican Party has said that they are pro-life, anti-abortion, but that's all that I see, is that they have said it. I don't see anything else. I shouldn't say I don't see anything else. I see some improvements, some good fights. I think maybe a year or so back, the governor of, I think it was Alabama, Republican, implemented huge legislation against abortion. It's fantastic, and other states doing the same thing. I think Louisiana was one. So that's great, but think back to 2016 to 2018, and what did you have? You had a Republican president, Donald Trump, who has he has been most outspoken pro-life Republican president that I've seen in a while. Not that I've seen a lot of presidents, because I'm still quite young, but historically speaking. And then you had a Republican majority House and a Republican majority Senate. For 2 years, it was a Republican majority, and this was the, quote, pro-life party. And what did they do? They did not defund Planned Parenthood. They did not outlaw abortion. They didn't do that at all. So it seems that we don't really have a party that fits the bill. But I will say, I guess right now the only thing you can do is go for the person who's going to say, um, who is going to say that they are pro-life, and who is going to say that they're going to fight for pro-life rights. Um, there's a lot of jokes about politicians being liars, not giving their word. I think those jokes are completely justified. But sometimes you just got to vote for. I guess that's all we can do. But I will point out an interesting fact here. Just when you think that I am saying you could only vote Republican, here and there, and you find these. You really like. It's hard to find them, and mainly because the media doesn't point them out. But there are pro-life Democrats, and I'm not on the left on a lot of issues, but I have so much respect for people who are Democrats, the few of them that are pro-life, because their party has completely sold out to the abortion industry. And they have stood firm, and they have said, you know what, I don't care if the party that I agree with 95, 98% on policy with, I don't care if they're going so far that way. Abortion is evil, it's wrong, and it should be outlawed, and they stood firm. I highly respect that. I highly commend that. And I think if you find yourself in the more conservative Republican camp who is, just so left wing, anti-democrat, I understand where you're coming from, but please at least have it within your heart to look at one of those people who are a Democrat that are pro-life. Look at them and at least have it within your heart to commend that, because that is a lot of bravery. Because, I'm going to say this. I think there's a lot of people who are Republicans that are just Republicans because where they're from votes Republican. They don't really believe in Republican values and whatnot. And if where they came from was very left and very pro-abortion, they'd have no problem doing that. They're just more power hungry. So the Republicans who do hold that belief, those practices, I don't have much respect for you as a politician. I don't have much respect for you. But those people who do stand firm in the pro-life side of it, despite what their party thinks, tremendous respect. So with that being said, it's a good segue into the next podcast. The next podcast, I'm going to do something that's going to scare me, and that is really dive into probably one of the most hot button issues of our day, and that is abortion, what I've been talking about. I think it's so important to have your view ironed out on abortion, especially when your vote can impact legislation that could save lives. So the thing that I'm doing, which I think is the more scary part, is I'm going to post on my social medias, and I'm going to invite people who are pro-choice, and I'd like you, if you have friends who are pro-choice, and this is the invitation I'm going to extend to them, is come listen to what I have to say. I'm hardly going to use the Bible at all. I'm just going to argue this on a purely secular level, just so everyone can start with the basic understanding. Listen to the arguments I make for pro-life. Listen to the arguments I make against abortion. And think about them. Tell me why I'm wrong. That's all I'm inviting you to do. I'm not inviting you to sit there and you have to believe me, especially if you're pro-choice, if you're not a Christian. I'm not sitting here saying you have to agree with me. All I'm inviting you to do is just hear me out. If I'm wrong, then you've only wasted about maybe, 30, 40 minutes of your life, and you keep continuing the belief you have. But if I'm right, think about it, because if you find within your heart or I should say, if they find within their heart that what I'm saying is actually starting to sound right, if it's starting to be true, then that could be a change of heart. And I mean, I think it'd be amazing if more people take the pro-life side to the point where there's more people voting for folks who are going to enact legislation that is anti-abortion and pro-life. But I'm going to stick here and say it is a hot button issue, but man, the sanctity of life, the fact that, I mean, innocent babies are being killed at such a high rate. Sorry if you just heard my dog, but I can't apologize for talking about this stuff. It might be taboo, but I cannot apologize for it, because I can't sit here and keep my mouth shut about an evil that's going wrong. I have some sort of a platform, and yeah, you know what? That platform is maybe 20 or 30 people who listen. That's still a platform, and if I do have that platform, then I'm going to speak the truth, and I'm not going to apologize for it. So that's where I am on that. Okay, a lot that I went over in this podcast. I hope this was a big clarification for the last podcast. And as always, if you disagree with me, let me know. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me where I make some missteps. Tell me where my interpretation's wrong. The discourse is really important. And keep in mind that we, like I said at the beginning, we probably have the same moral principles. It's just we might vary on how the rubber meets the road. And if we can both accept that we have the same moral principle, then we can actually be, hey, you know what? We see the same problem, and let's try to figure out how to solve it. Or I should say, think about it, which in turn may happen to solve it. But I digress. Okay, yeah, tell your friends next week. Sorry, maybe not next week, just next podcast. I'm going to, here's a pro-life side, pro-life argument. Just invite people who are on that side, just to engage. So yeah, I hope to see you there. I hope that you'll listen in on it. If you've just continuously been listening to my podcast, I just thank you so much for doing that. What are we, 9 or 10 episodes in? So great if you've stuck with me. And then as always, please ask questions, comments, things that you think I should talk about on the podcast in general. I welcome those with open arms. All right, take it easy. Have a great day, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye-bye.